Hey, hi. Good morning. I think that getting up early, it's just after 6 a.m., getting up early in the morning might be just the best way to beat the heat. Yeah, in my little stuffy studio. I have to close the curtains, close the windows, because the ambient sound, the world is waking up. And in my neighborhood, that means busy, busy street life, not too far below where I live. Recently, big news for me is that my brother has come to join me in Taiwan. His wife will soon follow. So he's living not too far, 8 kilometers from my house, and just getting settled in. And he's adapting, I have to say, quite rapidly to life in Taiwan. He calls it the new normal. And I really like that, and I wanted to use it for today's topic, because just as adjusting to a new life here in Taiwan, trust me, although there are similarities between the east coast of east coast of Taiwan, and Hawaii, vegetation, mountains, ocean orientation, the greenery, the blue, the sky with the beautiful clouds. But culturally, it's quite a change. Linguistically, being surrounded by a language that you don't understand. For me, it's been the new normal for many years. And I honestly like the anonymity of being surrounded by a language that I can speak or understand very little of. And I enjoy being outside the pale, the new normal. People, I do still generate a lot of attention when I walk down the street. People notice that I'm not like them, at least on the outside. Although, Weigel, Megel, an alien. Yeah. But what I want to talk about today, the new normal, is how quickly we adapt. Through the process of progressive awakening, it's tumultuous, and at times almost overwhelming, that the change it brings, the rapidity that it brings. The unsettling that comes along with surrendering all that you had thought to be so. The pure immensity of the universe, the pure immensity of learning what's so. I mentioned, I think last time, about the bombardment of us, constant bombardment from interstellar matter. And I mentioned neutrinos, and neutrinos is fascinating for many reasons. They think of neutrinos as a neutrino ocean. I understand that we're being bombarded with 3 trillion neutrinos every second. Now that's a million every second bombarding us. And the way it's visualized is neutrino ocean. And I love this word, ocean. So this neutrino ocean makes our big Pacific that's surrounding the island on which I live quite small in the scheme of things. And all you have to do is get out there on a sailboat, which I've had occasion to do, and I hope to have more opportunities, where you no longer see the land, where you start to live on the ocean, and you adjust your sleeping and life patterns. When we had 4 on the boat, 30 foot, 32 foot, not a big boat, but big enough. We had 4 people, and we would start to live in a cycle of 4 hours on, 4 hours off. 2 would be below sleeping. The 3rd would be on standby. And the 4th would be at the helm. And the standby position was a critical one. I love this position because you accompanied the person that's responsible for navigating and guiding the boat. But you're really helpless other than verbal input. You're not in control. And it's very similar to the state one finds himself in as they begin the process of the journey, sailing from non-abiding, from progressive awakening to permanent awakening. You're not the skipper. You're not at the helm. So there's an analogy from being that number 3 position, the observer, the watcher, the witness. And in this sense, you're serving as companionship, another pair of eyes for the true skipper. So this change of the way that we live, the cycles that we live, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And you do this on a 24-hour basis. And I tell you, the hours before dawn, when you're at the helm, you are enjoying at least a limited control, because the ocean is really controlling. You're not being proactive, you're more being reactive, responding to the conditions that you find yourself and your boat in. And you also have responsibility for the other three people, for the safety of the ship. And it's not unlike, again, to draw an analogy to my main concern here. When you have awoken and it's permanent, there's no going back. You've quieted the ego. The mind is seen as a useful tool, but not to be taken so seriously as we tend to do before we open our eyes. But that time before the sun comes up, that quiet time, because that's the stillest time of the day, is something to be savored and enjoyed. So this pattern that we have of 16 hours up and about, and 8 hours down, mending, sleeping, healing, resting, dreaming, is not some kind of etched in stone be-all and end-all for living a life, for living our lives. I mentioned recently that bimodal, biphasal sleeping. Sleep number 1, sleep number 2, with a break in between, has become the new normal for me. But these changes that come, how rapidly do they become normal? My new normal is changing daily as I mature in my spirituality. Just as we mature in this, hopefully, some of us just grow old, never did really grow up. Grow old without growing up. As we mature physically, the same holds true for spiritually. And it means moment by moment change as the only constant in the universe is change. At least the observable universe. When you go past observation, you realize that there's no change. It's just the eternal nowness. But back to the neutrinos, the ocean. This simile, this analogy, paradigm of being immersed in an ocean of neutrinos, which recently science has proven to contain mass, albeit on an atomic scale, much less mass than an electron, and even less mass than a proton. But it does carry mass. And I understand this mass to be bits of information that are bombarding us constantly. And I mentioned last time that the cerebral cortex, our ability, or at least my ability, to be aware and absorb more of this bombardment of information has also become the new normal. So it suits me well that I'm immersed in this, all of us are immersed in this neutrino ocean. 70% of the neutrinos, I'm told, that bombard us are from our sun. They're of solar origin, which leaves 30% that come from beyond. Supernovas are supposed to be really significant in the time that it takes for them to travel at the speed of light. Neutrinos seem to be, other than light itself, the fastest particles in the universe, approaching the speed of light. And I suspect that one day we'll find out that the speed of light is not the upper limit of how fast particles, or how fast anything can travel. I know that faster than light would kind of really disrupt mankind's minuscule understanding of what is. But it's not beyond the realm of possibilities that such a thing can or will happen. Seems to me that everything that we've taken for a fact, be it a scientific fact or a fact of our mind or ego, will eventually be not only disrupted, but dissolved. So here we are in this ocean of neutrinos, this notion, and not only neutrinos, there's other sources of this bombardment that we're subject to. Interstellar bombardment of energies, of light. And I believe, here we go, believe again. I am guessing that these particles or elements contain both past, present, and future simultaneously. And I was really kind of relieved, honestly, when I found out about the neutrino ocean. Because when I had the funniest relationship with water, I've been a swimmer since, competitive swimmer since early 3, 4, 5 years old. Started training and swimming. And the weirdest thing, even totally immersed in a pool, or better yet, the ocean, which is for me a much better place to swim because the element of the unknown. In a pool, you don't share much life except fellow swimmers. In the ocean, every bit of the ocean is alive. There's a lot of critters and creatures lurking about, sharing this ocean with you. And that, to me, that adds an element, much more natural. But I never could feel completely wet. And that's really, really hard to explain to anyone That, what do you mean? You're underwater. Can you get wetter than that? And I always felt some part of me couldn't get wet in the ocean. And it was, I don't know if this was what I held on that was at that time that was separate. That was the division, that was separateness, and that I hadn't been able to entertain oneness and wholeness. But even now, I still have this same feeling that I'd like to get completely wet. And when I learned about the neutrino ocean, and I got more sensitive and more receptive to its presence, I truly experienced immersion. I felt wet everywhere. I can feel the neutrino ocean because it penetrates us. Water doesn't penetrate us. Our skin, our biggest organ, keeps it out. Although there's a couple orifices that it can come in, isn't there? Mouth is the most speakable, but severely limits the intake of water. And maybe part of me was remembering the womb where we were completely immersed in water and breathing it in. So maybe part of my not getting wet was a longing to breathe in the water, as I remember the safest time of this life was in the womb. That's why it's so traumatic to leave. Most of us come out crying, don't we? So now, the neutrino ocean is part of the new normal. When first awakening, be it progressive or permanent, there's a lot of changes. But perhaps the most challenging change is what to do about your relationship with others. If you do nothing, you'll soon discover that they're subject to change, as you're not seeing anything, as you're truly seeing, instead of the illusion of seeing. Things tend to shake out. Friendships may be left behind, depending on the basis of that friendship. Relationships are not as easily, especially with your close ones, siblings, children, wives, or husbands. But they still get sorted out. But it's a harder nut to crack. So as you're wandering around in your spiritual infancy, I think of the People talking about the elephant in the room. Everybody knows it's there, but nobody wants to talk about it. Everyone, that's kind of a mass hallucination, or at least a mass agreement. And actually, you'll find out that we have a lot of these unspoken agreements, these acceptances of behavior that will be tolerated by the group in which we find ourselves. But I think an elephant in the room that everybody no one sees is useful, but I woke up laughing recently because a lot of what I talk to you about here, the titles of the episodes in particular, are gifted to me in the time before, from deep sleep and dreaming sleep and the time between my new cycles of sleep, sleep number 1 and sleep number 2. Things just come to me. And what came to me this time, it got me, I laughed out loud and my laughter woke me. It's more like, for me, there's an elephant in your shoe. Or there's an elephant in my shoe. A lot harder to ignore than the elephant in the room. But the same forces apply. We're not encouraged, we're discouraged, in fact, actively discouraged to discuss, even though the elephant in the room is possible to not see. We do a pretty good job of the social niceties of pretending it doesn't exist. But trust me, an elephant in your shoe is much tougher to ignore. And just as this huge change that you've encountered, a change that's continual, of no end, open-ended, this change that becomes a leap, a blind faith into the infinite, is a lot harder to not talk about. But nevertheless, in my personal experience, after permanent awakening, after many, many years of being in progressive awakening, when things really popped, man, I couldn't keep it to myself. I shared with several people that were intimate in my life at that time, pre-permanent awakening. And like everything else, much of that has been shaken out. But looking back at it, at the time, I didn't know how to contain it. And now I wish, I love that word sometimes, I wish I could have done a better job. I wish I could have kept it self-contained, kept it to myself, because my experience was almost no one shared my joy. I did have my favorite couple, the first ones that I told, and they honestly shared in my joy, and they believed me, whereas others that I shared with thought I was deluded because I didn't fit, that they couldn't see the subtle changes in me, which were huge from my eyes, but people on the outside couldn't see because the expectations that you're going to be a holy man without your personality, that you will totally change. This is what people expect from awakening, that you walk in grace, that you are blissed out 24/7. Well, if that happens for you, good on you. But it's not what happened to me, and it's not what I would expect would happen to others. The personality persists as long as you're in this body. And what perishes, this is what perishes when we leave this shell. The personality, although it remains after enlightenment, after awakening, abiding awakening, the personality too will pass. Another change I haven't addressed yet, and I've alluded to my witness that's been with me from my time in a crib. I can remember asking my mom, who is that person in the corner looking down on me? The witness. Well, your understanding of a witness, like everything else, you'll see that your understanding was veiled in ignorance. You couldn't clearly see. And I used to think that my witness is the real me. But again, that implies duality, me and that. And you learn that there's no duality. But yet, even in the understanding that all is one, the witness for me remained, but it went from a small letter to a big letter, just like we use for God or for the realized self, for emphasis. And my understanding of the witness became matured, just as my spirituality matured. But I still don't feel I can claim to say exactly what the witness is. But I speculate. And I've separated last time my witnesses from my spirit guide because I see a hierarchy, even though one doesn't exist. So how I look at my witness, something is still watching me, watching all of us. And I feel that our evolution, our evolving as a species from human doing to human beings, brings us closer to that witness. So, knowing that there's no separation, we're all together. We're all in this together. And appreciating glimpses of the witness are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are equally so. So herein lies the great paradox. That it seems to me the whole purpose of our existence in this human body that enables us to penetrate the veil, to lift the veil of ignorance. The whole purpose seems to be to resolve this paradox.